The rain was coming down so hard that night it felt like the sky itself had split open. Every drop seemed heavier than the last, hammering the tin roof of Emily's small two-room apartment until it sounded like war drums in the darkness. The dim glow of a single battery-powered lamp lit the living room, throwing long shadows across the peeling wallpaper and the thrift store furniture she'd collected over the years. Emily sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed she shared with her 7-year-old son, Oliver, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. They'd managed to stay dry inside, but the apartment was drafty, and the wind that slipped in through the old window frames made her shiver. The power had gone out 3 hours earlier, just after she'd boiled the last bit of pasta for dinner. The milk in the fridge would spoil if it didn't come back soon, and she was already calculating what that meant for her grocery budget. "Mom, are we gonna be okay?" Oliver asked sleepily, pulling the thin blanket up to his chin. He was trying to be brave, she could hear it in his voice. Emily forced a small smile and tucked the blanket tighter around him. "Of course we are, baby. We just have to wait out the storm." She leaned down and kissed his temple, inhaling the faint scent of his shampoo. Her mind, however, was anything but calm. Rent was due in 2 days, and the tips from the diner had been lighter than usual all week. Her part-time job barely kept them afloat as it was. She'd already skipped paying the phone bill to keep the electricity on, and now she feared she'd be in the dark literally and figuratively for longer than she could afford. She was just about to settle beside Oliver and try to sleep when a sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Sharp, unexpected, almost urgent. Her body went rigid. She froze for a second, glancing toward the front door. No one knocked at this hour, especially not in weather like this. The only neighbor she spoke to, Mrs. Green from down the hall, was likely already asleep. Emily hesitated, her mind running through every worst-case scenario. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Oliver, and padded barefoot across the cold linoleum floor to the door. Pressing her eye to the peephole, she saw him, a tall man standing in the hallway, completely drenched. His dark hair clung to his forehead, his coat was plastered against his broad shoulders, and water pooled around his shoes. When she cracked the door open just an inch, the rush of cold air hit her like a slap. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice deep but calm. "My car broke down a few blocks from here, and I've been walking in the rain. The motel nearby is full. He hesitated, glancing toward the flooded street behind him. "I just need somewhere to wait until it lets up." Emily's hand tightened on the edge of the door. Every instinct told her not to let a stranger in. She didn't know him. She didn't know his story. But there was something in his tone, polite, almost hesitant, that didn't feel threatening. His eyes, a deep brown, carried an exhaustion that went beyond the storm. She studied him for another beat before pulling the door open just wide enough for him to step inside. "Come in," she said quietly. "You shouldn't be out in this." The man stepped over the threshold, shaking off his coat before handing it to her. She fetched the old towel from the back of a chair and passed it to him. His hands were cold when their fingers brushed, and she noticed the faint tremor in them. "Thank you," he murmured, rubbing the towel over his hair. His gaze swept the small space, taking in the patched couch, the chipped coffee table, the small pile of Oliver's toys in the corner. Emily felt an odd flush creep up her neck, as if the room's poverty had suddenly been lit up under a spotlight. "I don't have much to offer," she said, closing the door and bolting it against the storm. "But you can sit here until the rain lets up. Hopefully the power comes back soon." He nodded, settling onto the couch. For a moment, the only sounds were the storm raging outside and the faint creak of the couch springs. Emily moved to the kitchen area, a small strip of counter with a coffee maker, and plugged in her old kettle to heat some water on the gas stove. From the bedroom, Oliver stirred and patted out, rubbing his eyes. When he saw the stranger, he stopped in his tracks. Emily quickly said, "It's okay, sweetheart. He just needed to get out of the rain." Oliver blinked up at the man, who offered him a small smile. "Hi there," he said. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. Emily felt something shift in the air, not quite trust, but not fear either. Just an odd, quiet sense that this night was going to mean more than she realized. Emily set the steaming mug of instant coffee down on the chipped table in front of him. The aroma wasn't much. Cheap coffee always smelled more bitter than rich, but it was all she had to offer. He took it with both hands, as if the warmth itself was a small luxury after the cold outside. "Thank you," he said again, his voice low but sincere. She sat across from him, tucking her knees up beneath her on the couch. The storm outside was still in full force, the wind howling like some wild thing trying to break its way in. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the room, and she caught his face in that pale light. Strong jawline, tired eyes, not the kind of man who looked out of place in a suit, yet here he was, wet hair clinging to his forehead, a shadow of stubble on his cheeks, and a thin layer of rainwater still clinging to his coat sleeves. "You said your car broke down?" she asked, more to fill the silence than out of curiosity. He nodded, wrapping his fingers around the mug. "A couple of blocks from here. I was headed out of the city, didn't check the weather first." "My bad," she gave a faint smile. "You're lucky you didn't get caught in the worst of it." His lips curved slightly, but he didn't elaborate. Something about him made her feel like there was more to the story than a simple breakdown. Still, she didn't press. She had learned over the years that some silences weren't meant to be filled with questions. From the bedroom, soft footsteps padded toward them. Oliver emerged, his small figure wrapped in his blanket like a cape. His hair was sticking up in every direction from sleep. "Mom," he mumbled, rubbing one eye. "Who's that?" Emily looked over her shoulder. "He's just waiting out the storm, honey. Go back to bed." But Oliver didn't move. He studied the stranger with that open, fearless curiosity only children could have. The man smiled faintly, lowering the mug to rest on his knee. "I'm James," he said, his tone gentle. "And you are?" "Oliver," the boy replied instantly, taking a step closer. "We don't usually have guests." James's smile widened. "Then I guess tonight is special." Emily bit her lip, torn between sending Oliver back to bed and letting him stay. But something about the man's calm demeanor and the way Oliver seemed instantly at ease made her pause. She motioned for her son to sit beside her. Oliver climbed up, leaning against her side, eyes still fixed on James. "Do you have kids?" he asked. James shook his head. "No, but I used to be a kid. And I was terrible at it. I was clumsy, always getting into trouble." Oliver grinned. "Me too." The next thing Emily knew, James was telling a silly story about the time he fell out of a tree trying to rescue a kite. He made the sound of the branches cracking, exaggerated the thud of his landing, and mimicked the horrified face of his childhood best friend. Oliver laughed so hard he nearly spilled his blanket onto the floor. Emily found herself laughing too, quietly at first, then with genuine warmth she hadn't felt in months. It struck her, in that moment, how rare it was to have company in her home. Most nights were just her and Oliver, sometimes a phone call from a friend, but rarely anything more. She hadn't realized how lonely the place felt until someone else's voice filled it. As the laughter faded, James's expression softened. "Your son's a great kid," he said, glancing at her. "He's my whole world," Emily replied. Her voice had a slight catch to it, one she quickly tried to cover by brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. James didn't push, but he didn't look away either. There was a weight in his gaze, like he was listening even when she wasn't speaking. Before she knew it, she was telling him more than she'd intended, how she'd lost her husband to an accident 3 years ago, how she'd been working at the diner ever since, trying to keep their heads above water. "It's not easy," she admitted. "But we manage." James's jaw tightened slightly, almost imperceptibly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer pity. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though filing away every word. The clock ticked past midnight. Oliver's head grew heavy against her arm, his breathing slow and even. Emily stood, guiding him gently back to bed. When she returned, James was folding the blanket she'd given him earlier. "You can take the couch," she said. "It's not much, but it's dry." He looked at her for a long moment before replying quietly, "It's more than you know." The next morning, the rain had stopped. James thanked her, slipped out, and was gone before Oliver woke up. Emily figured she'd never see him again. 3 days later, she walked into the diner for her shift and froze. Her manager was shaking hands with a sharply dressed man, James. Only now, he wasn't soaked and weary. He stood tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent. "Emily," the manager called, "meet our new CEO. He just acquired the diner chain." Emily's heart pounded as James turned, smiling knowingly. "We've met," he said. "Emily, I have an offer for you, something better than the night shift. You took me in when you had nothing to spare. Let me return the favor." In that moment, Emily realized the storm hadn't brought her just trouble, it had brought her a miracle. Emily later learns that the rain-soaked stranger she welcomed into her small home was actually the new CEO of the diner chain where she works. Shocked and overwhelmed, she listens as he explains how her kindness and generosity, offering shelter, coffee, and trust despite having so little, left a deep impression on him. Wanting to return the favor, he offers her a better position with improved pay, hours, and benefits, ensuring a more stable future for her and her son. Emily realizes that a single act of compassion on a stormy night has completely changed the course of their lives.